Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube, and welcome to the very first episode of EP of the Week, which is where I'll actually focus on spotlighting some of the best EPs from this era, or whatever, just great EPs in general, instead of just trying to shoehorn these EPs, whatever, in like to the Album of the Week series stuff. So finally, let's get into what is the first pick for episode number 1 of EP of the Week. And it is none other than the classic self-titled, or to some people also either titled, at least by the fans, has been either titled as Nuns Have No Fun or A Corpse Without a Soul. It is the self-titled classic 1982 EP from the legendary Mercyful Fate. So, since we are obviously celebrating anyways the 40th anniversary of this classic EP that would propel Mercyful Fate into the eye of the metal scene, whatever, around the world, this would definitely create such a big name and would lead, of course, to their most popular album, or at least 2 of their most popular albums. So everything just begins with this EP. So, and since this is considered a legendary EP anyways within this band's discography, and very infamous for a lot of other reasons, it is very much worthy of being spotlighted on this channel. So let's definitely dive in to what is the history of the Mercyful Fate EP and everything. So let's definitely get into it. So, before we have to get into the EP, we have to dive into the history of the formation of Mercyful Fate, which Mercyful Fate, of course, being formed in Denmark in 1981 after the ashes of the band Brats, which of course was Michael Denner and Hank Sherman. However, during some point, I guess in 1980, Michael Denner had left Brats to form a band called Danger Zone. However, I don't think it would go off. It wouldn't really kind of go any more further until like 81, until guys like King Diamond and Hank Sherman had left. Because by the time of during its disbanding, the lineup for Brats was obviously changing, and that's how King Diamond, of course, ended up coming into the band Brats after the disbanding, whatever, of the Danish band Black Rose, which King Diamond was a part of. So, and during this period, before just completely disbanding Brats, Hank Sherman and King Diamond were starting to kind of sway the direction Brats was kind of in, which is more of a punk, more garage rock sort of direction, and kind of switch it into the more of a heavier, more harder-edged direction. And however, after recording a couple of those stuff, or those songs, whatever, especially these songs would get turned into Mercyful Fate songs, there is a whole rehearsal tape that was bootlegged and was released, was it titled, I forgot what they called it, the Danger Zone Sessions, whatever that they fucking called it. But it had plenty of, like, again, early version like Death Kiss and everything. Eventually, Death Kiss got turned into a Dangerous Meeting. So there's a lot of these early versions of stuff, but this material was not satisfying the people over at CBS, who, on their demands, wanted Hank Sherman and King Diamond to go in a more commercial direction, I guess you say, maybe a more popular direction or whatever, and not sing in English. Because again, they were writing a lot of their stuff in English. Which is funny, because the whole entire Bratz full-length album that didn't feature King Diamond on vocals was all written in English as well. So I don't get that whole, I don't get CBS's weird demands. So Hank Sherman and King Diamond decided to just disband the band and just end their relationship with CBS. And that's where, of course, they ended up joining Michael Denner in the band Danger Zone. And they had released at least, again, a couple of demos that, again, would also feature plenty of songs that would get turned into Mercyful Fate songs. Maybe a few other ones that didn't, and it would see the light of day as part of the that Return of the Vampire compilation from like 91, 92-ish, whatever, that I've got. And I think everybody else has, if they're all, big Mercyful Fate fans. However, towards, I think, after their last demo, in 1982, eventually, Danger Zone would change their name to Mercyful Fate, and that's pretty much would lead us to the debut self-titled EP, which is basically after signing a deal with a very, at this time, a very small label in Ravon Records, who at this period was starting to kind of get very early bands like Crossfire in their infancy, and Frankenstein, and a few other bands. What they released, their very first release, which I've got on record, is the Metal Clogs Various Artists album, which again featured stuff from like Crossfire and Frankenstein and Gilgamesh and Impact. So, and pretty cool comp anyways that I own. That would be the first release on Ravon Records, and so in sometime in September of 1982, they finally released their second release. That would pretty much become the infamous Mercyful Fate EP, again produced by Jack Hustnix, or whatever his name was, who again did a lot of the production work anyways on the Metal Clogs compilation stuff. And I think he was in a couple of other bands or something ever, but he wasn't really that, I don't know how big of an artist he actually was in the Netherlands. Because again, Ravon Records is a Dutch label and not really a Danish label, whatever, But again, Mercyful Fate just caught the attention of him and Ravon Records. And so they ended up becoming the first label to really kind of sign Mercyful Fate and release their studio recordings and everything. So it's just, everything just begins here. Again, the lineup for the CP, of course, was none other than King Diamond, Hank Sherman, Michael Denner, Timmy Grabber, and Kim Ruz. Again, the classic lineup of Mercyful Fate. And the original pressings for the Mercyful Fate EP, of course, featured a white border around the artwork. Again, very infamous cover art, definitely stirred a lot of controversy. If it was ever imported here into the States, they had to apparently put a black bag over the artwork because the fact of what it features. A half-naked female, of course, just panties on but no bra, just already crucified onto the cross, with, of course, a couple of druids or whatever. I think they are like druids. Because again, I always think of the Undertaker, the wrestler, and all the druids he had that carried out to the ring, whatever, during the Attitude Era and everything, those stuff. So to me, whenever I see guys like this, as well as these black hoods or dark hoods, whatever, and over them, and she looks, again, they to me look like druids. So. But again, this artwork just caused a lot of controversy. They had to put a black border, or a black bag, around it to kind of cover the very risque artwork of it. But since I'm still on the subject of the artwork here, before I get into any of the music, the supposedly the white border pressing again of this EP, it's been rumored. And for all I know, apparently according to the Colosseum, it only was a rumor that was spreaded by record collectors. They all claim that the original white border pressings of this EP at least were limited to 200 copies. But according to, obviously, Dan over at the Colosseum, he believes that that's all gibberish and that's not entirely completely true, and that was just a rumor that was spread by record collectors just so they can bilk off or just jack up the price of it more so they can and make it seem as rare as it is. But according to him, it probably wasn't 200 copies rare. It could have been limited to 100 copies. Who knows how many copies there actually was of the white border pressing. That kind of has to be legitimized, by either King Diamond, Hank Sherman, or Michael Denner, or even possibly Kim Ruz, because Timmy Grammer's obviously since has been sadly dead. At least the 4 existing members that recorded the CP are probably be the ones that would have to verify that this was at least was limited to 200 copies for the white border pressings of the very first Mercyful Fate EP here. But again, eventually afterwards, after going out of print, they would release pressings of the CP without the white border. So there you go. But again, it's a very much a more of a collector's item, and people are still searching out to find at least copies of it with the white border, at least under a reasonable price than what these record collectors on eBay or Discogs or whatever, and maybe even these record stores that are trying to shill out a copy of the CP with the white border around it. So there you go. So let's definitely finally focus onto the music, because this was pretty much would be on a wider spectrum that people got to actually hear what Mercyful Fate sounded before the Melissa album in 1983. But before that, this was probably, again, the first time that on a wider spectrum that people actually got to hear Mercyful Fate, and they sure got a very firm idea of what Mercyful Fate were about. If anybody had remembered what Hank Sherman and Michael Denner were doing in the band Bratz and what they sounded like, this would have been a big surprise, because this was so far removed from the sort of garagey, sort of punks rock sound of the Bratz album and just their sound. This was just a different turn. This is definitely taking more inspiration and musically from maybe the more new wave or British heavy metal bands of the time, but you can tell they're also showing a lot of their influences as well. Michael Denner and Hank Sherman are obviously showing off their influences from, like, let's say K.K. Downing or Glenn Tipton of Judas Priest, or either Uli John Roth and Rudolf Schenker, or even at times maybe Michael Schenker and Rudolph, or even Matthias Jabs and Rudolph. Just all the various different lineups of the band Scorpions. So they're really showing a lot of their influences from these couple of bands, and are definitely infusing it into the more darker and more sinister sound, which takes a lot of, at times, slight inspiration from the early days of Judas Priest, but it's just even turned up even much more higher. It's just, the volume is has been turned up a lot more higher, especially within the lyrical departments and the image of the band. This is definitely more satanic. It's definitely more evil in its approach. And of course, King Diamond at this time really was devoted to being a Satanist. And that was his religion. He actually really was, and he believed in that religion. And that's why a lot of the lyrics on these songs just come across as a lot more darker and sinister. However, I probably would say that the song Nuns Have No Fun probably comes as close to being as vulgar, or to the vulgar content of, let's say, like a song like Son of a Bitch off of Breaker by Accept. So it kind of pushes it towards that terrain, but yet it kind of holds itself a little bit back, but it still kind of pushes towards that in a way, in that direction of being pretty, very vulgar and risque. So, I mean, it's got the sort of very satanic leanings, but it definitely kind of, it's one of the earliest songs I know of that actually uses that particular word, and I don't really even need to spell it out, because if you're familiar with the song, you know which word I'm talking about. So I'm trying to keep things just a little bit PG, even though I will, throw down at least the F word or something, but I try not to go that vulgar as what this song kind of goes, what it really kind of pushes itself into. So if you want to look up the lyrics to the song Nuns Have No Fun, then go right ahead. You'll get a better idea, and you'll know why I'm a little bit hesitant on trying to sing or spelling out the word that they're using in this particular song. I know it's a cop-out, but I'm just trying to keep things just a little bit PG in a way. I know that there are definitely some other people, especially who I'm friends with, that just will not give a shit and will just say whatever. But right now, I'm just kind of trying to keep it a little bit for this episode. Obviously, you can even tell by the cover art here, I had to blur out the breasts and everything just because of, even though I know that Metal Blade Records are obviously using the artwork and uncensored everything, but I still don't trust people on YouTube. I still don't trust many people on here. I still tend to expect people to be assholes and try and flag this as being inappropriate. So that's just where I'm at. Of course, if I was doing this live, or let's say recording this as it is instead of being audio, but actually in video form on my phone, then I obviously would show the cover and I wouldn't be blurring anything out, to be honest. I wouldn't be. But it is what it is still, so I just have my precautions. But either way, the music and everything is just classic on here. I mean, Corpse Without a Soul, Nuns Have No Fun, Doomed by the Living Dead, Devil Eyes. It's like, this is such a classic EP. I mean, what? It clocks in at like 22 minutes and 4 seconds, but it's just a classic EP. I've listened to these songs freaking so many times. When I was getting into Mercyful Fate in like 2008, actually, it's been this long, I only remember the name from a particular magazine that I used to have, and it was at least titled 100 best whatever or greatest bands of all time, or metal bands or rock bands, whatever the fuck it meant, but the cover of this magazine of course featured Corey Taylor of Slipknot in his mask and everything, and this is how I got exposed to bands like Saxon, for example. And then same here for Mercyful Fate, who I didn't really know who the hell Mercyful Fate was until that magazine. But I didn't really dive into their music at all. I didn't really search them up. I searched up Saxon, but I didn't search Mercyful Fate. By a year or two later, it was my brother who ended up actually decided to dive into the music and stuff of Mercyful Fate. And the first thing I ever heard by Mercyful Fate was actually the song Is That You, Melissa, off of In the Shadows. And I thought it was a pretty cool song, and I'm like, for a name and especially for the image, I was expecting a little bit more extreme. But it was definitely more melodic. It had a nice sort of hook to it. It was a little bit catchy. And it almost had a very, I wouldn't say whimsical, but it's just going for something that you would expect from a band like Judas Priest, or maybe a little bit Iron Maiden. But again, even like Scorpions or something, like Great Scorpions. So it just had a little bit of a slight power metal vibe going on to it. But again, that's because of the tone that the song was going for. And again, with King Diamond's vocals and stuff, where he's just high as they are, I just was like, this is different. It's one step ahead of Judas Priest in a way to me because of the vocal deliveries of this. And I just was intrigued. And so I was basically had my brothers like, let me check out some more Mercyful Fate. And so that's how I ended up hearing for the first time the Melissa album and of course the EP. And when I went back and started listening to those albums, I got exposed to it because even during the same time, I was even getting a bit more exposed to like Diamond Head and even like Sweet Savage, even the band Savage, all the stuff that my brother wanted to check out because of finding the old demo stuff and hearing them, covering stuff like Killing Time and Let It Loose. And stuff like Sucking My Love and It's Electric or any of those, or Am I Evil, and those great songs and so. And also I was even finding out about Angel Witch because I ended up going on YouTube and finding uploads of the, that VH1 Inside the Music documentary or whatever on Metallica, where Lars Ulrich was actually talking about various different new wave or British heavy metal bands, and that's how I found out about, let's say, like Tigers of Pantang. but he also mentioned Angel Witch in there, and I was like, who the fuck are Angel Witch? That's how I ended up getting turned on to them. But through my brother wanting to kind of check out these other bands that they were covering, it just opened up a whole other door. My brother still is a big Metallica fan, and he had a long time ago at this point, he had at least a copy of the Garage Days or Garage Inc. disc, whatever, the 2 discs where it had the Garage Days Revisited EP and a few other stuff, just them recording other sort of classic new wave or British heavy metal songs, or whatever. Just songs that really influenced them. And so there was at least some Diamond Head songs on there, and there was, of course, the track that was titled Mercyful Fate, which is a medley of some of the classic Mercyful Fate songs like Evil and such, I wasn't even turned on the Mercyful Fate because of that. It was more so because of the song Is That You, Melissa off of In the Shadows. So that just was my introduction to Mercyful Fate. So Metallica didn't really have anything to do with it. For a lot of people, it probably was. But for certain people like me, it should have been, but it was for other different reasons that I ended up getting, turned on to like Mercyful Fate. And I once again created another favorite out of me. I got another favorite band out of it, and I was just so mesmerized by the music. It was definitely raw. It was to me, it was just a one step ahead of what I was already a fan of, that being Judas Priest, and I was still somewhat getting into like Accept. And of course, I was still a little bit into like Iron Maiden, and I definitely loved the early stuff from Def Leppard, and I was just, what I was liking, even like UFO and Thin Lizzy and Deep Purple and Uriah Heep and stuff like that, it was just one step ahead of that. It took a lot of those influences from some of those previous bands, but they took it and they twisted in their own little direction and made something completely unique out of it. Because there wasn't a whole lot of bands at this time period that were kind of doing what Mercyful Fate was doing, especially in the lyrical and the image department. You really couldn't say that Black Sabbath was like this, because of Black Sabbath, even in the early 80s right here, really kind of went for a more fantasy-based than, let's say, very dark imagery, even though Sabbath wasn't even that dark early on. They flirted a little bit of it, but not to the degree that something like Mercyful Fate was. I know some are now trying to call at me, what about Venom? Difference there is that between Venom and Mercyful Fate, Venom were just doing it as shock, and the lyrical content was more humorous. You could tell the band wasn't completely taken as seriously as King Diamond was in Mercyful Fate. He took this stuff way too serious than any of the guys in Venom. This, of course, is way before we even got guy like Glenn Benton of Deicide, who went even more further with his serious beliefs in Satan and everything, where he just went even more further with it. Where I think it's almost to the point where it kind of got a little bit disturbing for some. But King Diamond was the first one that kind of probably disturbed a little bit more people. And this EP really kind of stirred up a lot of that, and I think it really created a bit more of a name for Mercyful Fate, and it got them some, public attention. That's just where that's where a lot of things begin. AC/DC got a lot of attention early on due to the lyrical antics and everything of Bon Scott, whether it be a little bit, some would have thought a little bit misogynistic, but it just was more done as a way to probably see how many people they can piss off and see if they can gain attention off of that before, starting to go into the direction they did with like Highway to Hell and stuff, where it started to gain more of the attention of the Christians and everything, and the community, the Catholics, whatever, and that started to, I guess, look at deem the band as being satanic. But Mercyful Fate were the first one to, especially King Diamond, to embrace this sort of imagery, and were very serious about this imagery, and it really meant something to them. compared to other ones that were just doing a shock, especially Ozzy Osbourne. He was just doing a shock, whereas this was beyond the levels of being shock value. So this was a whole other level of shocking to some too, I guess you can say. So it just gained them something different, and it made some people afraid to actually want to listen to anything from Mercyful Fate, and by the time we get to like an album like Melissa, which would be released on a much more even wider spectrum, what some of the earliest metal releases from Roadrunner Records, and of course what being even licensed to Megaforce here in the United States, and was it Caroline or something in like Canada? So it was spreading in a way. And so people definitely were feeling a little bit more scared to actually check out anything from Mercyful Fate. It was the same thing with like Venom. By the time they probably see, let's say, like the Welcome to Hell cover art, or even the Black Metal cover art, or let alone like let's say like the At War with Satan or any of the other cover arts, there everyone was probably going, because the people were obviously, because of the time that they were growing up, they were living in very religious households. And so by the time they were trying to dive into the more hard rock, heavy metal spectrum, just that diving into that genre, they probably just went and said, nope, I am not listening to that. That's just probably everybody's similar reaction to like Mercyful Fate and this EP. But eventually people caved in and gained a whole new fan base and created a legend out of it. So this is great. I know I didn't spend a lot of time, talking about the music, but I mean, what can you really say? It's a legendary EP. I think everybody else has heard this EP and probably doesn't need to hear me really go into any depth about it. It's just classic songs, and sure, it's definitely not Mercyful Fate at the most defined. It's not the most realized effort for Mercyful Fate. That would probably be like Melissa or Don't Break the Oath. It's still a good enough effort from Mercyful Fate, and it's just a good time capsule, whatever, into them developing their core sound that would get, realized by Melissa and Don't Break the Oath and so on, and just getting a very good idea of even the personality traits or whatever, or the charisma of a voice like King Diamond and his approach to songwriting and to imagery and to even theatrics and stuff. So it's definitely great there, and I'm definitely happy to at least to spotlight this as around its anniversary. Even though it's just a month after its anniversary, I know some will say it's just we're close to its anniversary because of whatever the fuck the Metal Archive says. Still, it's just great, and I'm just happy to. And I think it was obviously worthy of it because of, before I really get into like a classic like Melissa, you have to kind of start off with the thing that started it all, and that being this EP right here. So for everybody else that grew up listening to this release, again, if you have any positive or negative, you can leave those comments in the comment section below. But for those who have never listened to this release, I don't know. It shouldn't be that difficult now. It might have been now because of what a lot of the, obviously like the scalpers or something, have probably bought out all the copies of the Metal Blade reissues of this EP. But if you're still able to get a hold of a copy, go and get it. It is definitely worth every penny, and it's worth it every bit of your money. It's a classic release from them. This is just where everything began for Mercyful Fate. And if you want go any more further and really check out everything, even like before this and stuff, or any recordings, like the demo recordings, your closest bet as on an official scale is that Return of the Vampire compilation, which is another great and very much a worthy addition to your collection. It is another sort of good look into what they were before they really kind of started developing even more of it for the CP and the Melissa and Don't Break the Oath releases. So with that, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone. And I'll be back with another Album of the Week episode next week. Take care.